I said to the brethren that the title of this message is "The Righteous King Reigns." But you could title this message, "Rejoice, the Lord is King." Or you could title it, "Crown Him with Many Crowns." Or you could title it, "The Lamb in His Throne," because that's the message. Several things were used of God to give me this message. One, I was thinking about you and the burden that you've had to bear this year and the different trials that you've suffered. And I was thinking about the brethren in other places that are suffering, and it's from personal heartaches. It's from heartaches brought on by brethren. It's from a nation that's divided and all these different trials in this world. And I was thinking about those things. But also, another thing is I had been studying this psalm, and I watched the inauguration yesterday. And this psalm really spoke to me in a special way after watching that. If you notice here in verse 1, it says this is a psalm for Solomon. Psalm 72:1. It's a psalm for Solomon. And this is a prayer of David. And he's praying for his son, Solomon, because he knows that the Lord's ordained him to be the king. And he says in verse 1, "Give the king thy judgments, O God, and thy righteousness unto the king's son." God had made David righteous, and a righteous and just king. And in spite of all his failures and all the troubles he had, he was a righteous and just ruler. And he knew that only God can make a righteous and just king, and these gifts are given by God. And I'll tell you how God gave wisdom to Solomon to be a righteous and just king. He didn't just drop wisdom in his heart. He made him see Christ. That's how God makes a sinner wise. He makes him see Christ, who is our wisdom, who is our righteous judge, and he makes us follow him. So David knew this. Now, knowing this, brethren, whether we agree with any president's politics or not, the fact that they're president means God put them there, and that means something. And we should pray for them that God would give them righteousness or wisdom to rule in righteous judgment. We should pray for that. But as I watched that inauguration of the new president, I thought about David being replaced by Solomon as king. Solomon replacing David as king. And I thought, old earthly Israel, just like the old covenant law, old earthly Israel was temporal. And the kings and the priests were men who had to be replaced from time to time because they died. Well, that's the same with this nation. That's why, we've wised up enough to know don't leave one in office too long, and our rulers too long. We got to switch them out. And but they had to they didn't replace kings just simply for no reason. God did it at his good pleasure, or they died. But when a man was a king, he was a king from then on. But they did die, and they had to be replaced. Well, brethren, that's how it is with every nation in this world and every ruler in this world. But here's the thing. Solomon is a picture of David's son, the Lord Jesus Christ, and he's the king eternal. He was the king before he came. He was born the king, and he's the king now. And he's always ruled his kingdom and shall always rule his kingdom. And there's no change in his throne. And the fact of the matter is, you and I who've been born again of God, just like you were born into this nation right here, we've been born into the kingdom of God. That's the only way you can come into that kingdom. You got to be born in it. And we've been born into that kingdom. We're freeborn, really freeborn. We're born into this kingdom. And our king is Christ. He's the King of kings and Lord of lords. And that means the kingdom that we're members of, the kingdom that we're citizens of, is the kingdom of all kingdoms. That's where we are. And that's who we're ruled by. And so by creating us in righteousness and holiness, in his righteousness and holiness, brethren, we're in his kingdom without end. It won't ever end. We're in it now, and it won't ever end. We're his holy nation, and we will be for eternity, because he made us so. Our king is king forever. And you and I have been made king priests, holy king priests. Go read Peter's word about that. We've been made king priests by his blood. And that won't change. We're not going to be replaced by other king priests. That's eternal. You wouldn't have eternal life. God wouldn't tell you right now, you have eternal life right now if you had any sin. You're righteous. You that know him, you that been born of him, you're righteous. And that's why God says to you, you have eternal life. You're in a kingdom that knows no end. Now, I know it doesn't appear like that to us a lot of times, and it doesn't appear like that to this world, but the kingdom of God comes without our observation. Nonetheless, that's so. You're in his kingdom, ruled by this king. And so, we're going to reign by this king. We are right now, and we shall. Brethren, don't get caught up in the divisions of this world. Don't get caught up in this. Just don't. And I know it's all designed by the devil to appeal to our flesh, and it does. And we get caught up in it. You know what we manifest by doing that? We manifest we're not looking to Christ. Don't get caught up in it. Because here's the truth. Paul said in Philippians 3:20, our conversation, and that means our citizenship is in heaven, from whence also we look for the Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, the King, who shall change our vile body that it may be fashioned like to his glorious body. Right now, all we have is a vile body, but it's going to be one day fashioned like his glorious body, according to the working whereby he's able even to subdue all things to himself. Remember that. He gives lesser kings in this earth, but he's the power. They're going to do what he tells them to do. And so Romans 13 tells you and me, just submit to them. As long as they don't keep us from worshiping Christ, submit to them and do whatever they say, because he's ruling them. Whatever they do that you don't like, Christ is doing it. He's doing it. Now, it might be sinful. It might be for sinful gain. It might be for filthy lucre and the love of money that is their motive for doing it. But Christ is overruling it, and they're doing it because he's wanting it to bring, he's willing it to come to pass. But let me show you from this psalm something that's even more blessed than that. Here's the assurance we have. Being in Christ's kingdom, under Christ the King's rule, he's ruling with perfect judgment in righteousness in this earth right now for you and me. He's working everything just for you and I who are members of his kingdom. That's what he's doing. And he's doing it to keep us looking to Christ our King. That's why he's doing it. He's doing it to remind us that he alone is our righteousness. He's doing it to remind us he alone provides the grace and the strength by which we're going to continue in faith. So he's turning you and me from everything below, with all the trials, with all the rulers, with everything that's going on in our lives. He's doing this to turn us from us to Christ, to remind us he's our all and in all. And that's the purpose. Now, when we suffer these trials, when we disappoint ourselves and we disappoint our brethren, and our brethren disappoint us, brethren, whatever trial it is making us sorrow, and there's so many things that make you really, really sorrowful. Some things you just don't understand and you can't explain it. And you may be a lifetime trying to understand it. But beholding Christ, we behold the only comfort we have is Christ. He is the only comfort we have. And beholding him, we remember he sent the trial. We remember he's working righteousness for us in the midst of it. And we remember, and here's what he's going to make his child experience. This is why he sends trouble. He's going to make you experience that his grace is sufficient for you. We talk about wanting to know more and more that Christ is our only strength. Well, I'm going to tell you how he's going to make you know that in direct proportion to how he makes you suffer and see you don't have any strength. And that's painful, very painful. But here's the thing, you wouldn't cause the suffering, you wouldn't cause anybody to suffer through what you're suffering or anything like that. You don't want to do that, but here's the thing about it. His grace will make you know it's so much greater than the suffering. Even when you suffer, his grace and his strength is so much, it makes it worth it. Though you wouldn't cause the suffering, it makes it worth it because you learn more that he is truly your only strength. I've seen more this year clearer than ever before. I'm nothing but weakness. But Christ is nothing but strength, and he's my only strength. That's what he's going to teach us. Now, first of all, I want you to see this. Christ, our righteous King, rules, and he rules his people in righteousness. He says here in verse 2, he shall judge thy people with righteousness, and thy poor with judgment. The mountains shall bring peace to the people, and the little hills by righteousness. He shall judge the poor of the people. He shall save the children of the needy, and shall break in pieces the oppressor. They shall fear thee as long as the sun and moon endure throughout all generations. That can't be spoken of Solomon. None of that can be spoken of Solomon. Now, he was a good king while he was a good king. But that's so of every king. He's a good king while he's a good king, while God made him a good king. But this is the king who is only good. We're talking about this Christ. Now, who is Christ exercising this judgment for in this earth? Who is it that makes up this kingdom? David's praying to God, and he says, he shall judge thy people. Christ is exercising judgment in this world for God's people, for God's elect, for those he chose in Christ before the foundation of the world, not by any righteousness in us. He's working judgment for those Christ came and redeemed. He's working judgment for you who he's proven are his elect by sending forth the Holy Spirit and sanctifying you and bringing you to a belief of the truth. He's working judgment for his people. Now here's the description of us. We're the poor. He says in verse 2, he shall judge thy people with righteousness and thy poor with judgment. That's who we are. We're the poor. I listened to those speakers yesterday, and they talked about how good our nation is and kept using the term sacred, this sacred ground we're on and this sacred thing that was taking place. No, there ain't nothing sacred about it. It's not holy. That word means holy. There's nothing holy about it. There's only one that's holy. And when you're in God's presence, you're on holy ground. But here's the thing about that is they were talking about the good people of this nation. Our Lord has taught us there's none good, not one. The only one that's good, Christ said, is God. He's the only one. We're poor. We're bankrupt of righteousness, totally. We are bankrupt of all holiness in ourselves. In our flesh, we're poor. We have poverty of spirit. Unless he gives us a new spirit and maintains us by the Holy Spirit, we don't have any spirit of God. We're poor. And we have a poverty of sin and inability. And that's how we are, brethren. We're wicked. That's what we are. Remember Christ when he was speaking to his brethren that he had made righteous in him. But speaking of just them and what they are in their flesh, and speaking of us and what we are in our flesh, he said, if you being wicked know how to give good gifts to your children, shall not God? We're wicked. It's all we are. We need to stop thinking somehow that we're good or better. We're not. We're not good. Not in ourselves. But he's gonna judge with righteousness the poor. If you can take your place there and being the poor, totally poor in ourselves, this is who God's doing this for. This is who Christ our King is working this for. Now look, being poor, we're needy. Verse 4, he says he'll save the children of the needy. And he says in verse 12, he'll deliver the needy when he crieth. He says the poor and him that hath no helper. That's us. Verse 13, look down at verse 12. He said, he'll deliver the needy when he crieth, the poor also, and him that hath no helper. Verse 13, he'll spare the poor and needy. He'll save the souls of the needy. He'll redeem their soul from deceit and violence. He's shown us we're the needy, brethren. Everything, we need everything. We need everything spiritual and we need everything temporal. Well, Christ said a man can receive nothing except it be given him from above. What you have, he gave it, both spiritually and temporally. He gave it. We like to think, well, I built this business and I pulled myself up and I did it. But the fact of the matter is we wouldn't have the health to do it if he didn't give it to us. He'll let you see that every now and then and see that if he don't keep you healthy, you ain't going to even have the strength to do anything. He gives everything. He gives us righteousness. He gives us strength, both spiritual and temporal. And so he makes you see we're the one in need. And here's why we're needy. There's an oppressor. There's an oppressor. He said he's going to break in pieces the oppressor. We have an oppressor. The devil's the oppressor. We know that. But I tell you something else. Our sinful flesh is the oppressor. The flesh in you and me, and we're needy, and Christ is the only one that can free us from that oppressor and provide us what we need. But in his righteous judgment, he's provided for the poor and needy. He's already done it. He's already broken the oppressor in pieces. Look here. He says, verse 2, David's looking forward to this happening. But we know he's come and done it. Look at verse 2. He shall judge thy people with righteousness and thy poor with judgment. He's done it. To do that, do you know what for Solomon to judge like this, he's going to have a heart of love and compassion for the poor and the needy. And our Lord Jesus Christ had a perfect heart for us poor and needy people. His poor and needy people. He had a perfect love for us and a perfect love for God his Father. And he's the only one that did. And so our King came forth and he judged us with righteousness. What he did is he judged that we could not make ourselves righteous in ourselves. He judged that the only way we could be made the righteousness of him, which he required, is if he did it. And so he took his place and suffered for us. He suffered hell for us. You that have children and you that have new children, would you give your child to suffer hell for a vile, wicked sinner? That one you hold and love and cherish, would you give that child to suffer hell for a wicked sinner? That's what God the Father did. That's what Christ did for his people. That's what this king did. You see why he's the lamb in the throne. He's the lamb who took our place. There's never been a king like this. Can you imagine the day we would have a president that would put himself in the place of the poor to make the poor rich? They all talk about it, but the whole purpose of being where they are is so behind the scene they can make themselves rich at the expense of the poor. That's just the way of man. But we got a king who made himself poor to make us rich. That's what he did, and he did it by bearing the hell we deserved on the cross. And he did it. He accomplished it. And so he fulfilled this prophecy. Verse 4, he broke in pieces the oppressor. He did spare the poor and needy. He saved the souls of the needy. He redeemed our souls from deceit and violence. Now, child of God, we're already saved by Christ our King. Get this. We're already saved by him. When you read the Old Testament, he's talking about what he's going to do. Make sure you hear it in light of the fact he's already done it. You can put it in the past tense. He has saved us. He has broken the oppressor. It's just a matter of time, Paul said, and he's going to bruise Satan under your feet shortly. But he's already done it. He's already come and he broke in pieces the oppressor, the devil. He broke in pieces that oppressor that is the body of sin you're carrying around right now. He's already broken him in pieces. He's buried. He's dead before God. And he's broken in pieces the death and hell, which were the oppressors. Every oppressive enemy we have, he's already broken them in pieces. He's done it. So now what he's doing is he's making us see he already judged us in righteousness. And so we can be assured everything he's going to do in this earth for us, he's going to do it in righteousness. He's going to do it right. So if he sends me to trial and it's sorrowful, I have this assurance. I have this comfort of knowing this is the right thing. It's the right thing. And why it's right is not because of anything I've done. What I might have done might have been wrong. What you might have done might have been wrong. Not always. That's not always the case. And I say that because I don't want some of my suffering brethren right now who are suffering to think they did something wrong for the Lord to send them that. Find me what Job did wrong. That's just self-righteous meanness to accuse, well, you must have done something wrong. I told you about my grandmother. She dropped off some food at a lady's house and she had broken her wrist. And the lady came out and said, what happened? My grandmother said, oh, it's just sin. And that woman said, what'd you do? She didn't mean that. She meant, it's just what I am. It's just what I expect in this world. But I'm saying to you, when he sends you the trial, he's showing you he's already judged you in righteousness, and he's going to make you see that and know that and comfort you through it. And you'll know this has all been right when you see him that way and know that. Now, secondly, where is it he's going to give us this discernment? Where is he going to teach us this, that he's our peace? Look at verse 3. The mountains shall bring peace to the people, and the little hills by righteousness. The place where you're going to find this truth, and he's going to speak to your heart and teach you this, is under his gospel where you are right now, hearing it preached. That's where he's going to do this. You see, the mountain is Zion, Mount Zion. That's where the Hebrew writer says, you that believe, you've been brought to that mountain, heavenly Jerusalem. It's where Christ is speaking to his people right now through the gospel as it's being preached. That's the mountain we've been brought to. We can't touch that mountain. It's a spiritual mountain. But that's where we are, and he's in that high mountain, and he's teaching his people. Go over to Isaiah 2. I want to show you a few scripture. I hope we don't take too long here, but I want you to see these scripture. Isaiah 2, verse 2. He's speaking of Judah and Jerusalem, and that's his people. That's his elect. That's who he's talking about. Now watch this. Verse 2. It shall come to pass in the last days. Hebrews 1 tells us that started when Christ came. That's when the last days started. Most of what people are looking for to happen at the end of the last days started when Christ came. And if you'll read prophecy that way, you'll find out he restored Israel first. His people out of natural Israel. He restored them first. And then he's calling the Gentiles now. But you read this, watch this. And it shall come to pass in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains. See, he's in the mountain, and these lesser mountains, plural, is where you are right now. This is the mountains that are just hills compared to that mountain. But look, and he's in that mountain, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations, his people out of all nations shall flow unto it, singular. When we come to this little mountain, this little hill, we're coming to that mountain. We're coming to that one mountain where Christ did. We're coming to Christ. And many people shall go and say, come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us of his ways, and we'll walk in his path. For out of Zion, out of that heavenly Zion, shall go forth the law. This is that law he said. Remember when he said Christ would come, and he said, and the isles shall wait for his law? This is it. It's the gospel. And that's what we're doing right here. The word of the Lord from Jerusalem, from heavenly Jerusalem. He shall judge among the nations. That's what he's telling us in our song. And shall rebuke many people. He's doing it through this gospel. And what's going to be the result when he does that? He's going to create a new spirit in you, and he's going to renew that spirit in you, and he's going to remind you he's ruling things, and he's your peace. And when he does that, here's what's the result's going to be. They'll beat their swords in the plowshare, and their spears in the pruning hooks, and they won't lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Does that mean we're not going to ever have wars in the earth? No. That means in your heart, he's going to create peace toward your brother, whoever you got out against. You're going to quit pulling out the sword on them, and you're going to do what you're going to be a farmer to them. You're going to till the ground. You're going to try to help them, and you're not going to try to hurt them, but you're going to do it. You may come in here with your sword drawn. You may come in here ready to make war, but when he speaks peace into your heart, you're going to go out of here beating that sword into a plowshare. You're going to go out of here with peace in your heart. And you're going to go out of here doing that. You're going out of here walking in the light of the Lord. And the churches he establishes in the earth, they're the mountains and the hills from which he's feeding us. Go look back at Psalm 72. Look down at verse 16. He said, there should be a handful of corn in the earth. Where's it going to be? Where's this bread going to be? On the top of the mountains. It's just his mountains in the earth now, and the fruit thereof is going to shake like Lebanon. It's going to be plentiful. And they of the city shall flourish like grass of the earth. You're of the city. You're of the heavenly Jerusalem. And you're going to flourish but through this gospel. Let me show you that. Ezekiel 34. Ezekiel 34, and look at this. In verse 13, what he promised. He said, I will bring them, 13, I'll bring them out from the people. That's what he did through the gospel. I'm going to bring them out from the people. I'm going to gather them from their countries, and I'm going to bring them to their own land. He's going to bring you into his kingdom, into this land that is our land, through the gospel. Being born again of him, into this new land. And I'll feed them upon the mountains of Israel. That's where you are right now. By the rivers and in all the inhabited places of the country. And I'll feed them in a good pasture. And upon the high mountains of Israel shall their fold be. That's where you are right now. You're in the fold, in the good pasture, in the high mountain, where his gospel's established, where he's feeding his people. And they'll lie in a good fold, and in a fat pasture shall they feed upon the mountains of Israel. And he said in Joel 3:18, it'll come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drop down new wine. The gospel's new wine. And the hills will flow with milk. And the rivers of Judah shall flow with waters. And a fountain will come forth of the house of the Lord and water the valley of Shittim. And that's what he's doing. He is the new wine. He's the milk. He's the fountain. And he's making all this flow to us through this gospel in this mountain. And knowing it's Christ speaking to us, you know what we say? Did you go read Isaiah 52? He said, what are these people that are oppressing my people? He was talking about his people in Israel who were being yoked with the law and whipped with the law. He said, who are these people? They're oppressing my people. He said, so in the day I come forth, they're going to know it's I that speaks. And he says, and this is what they're going to be brought to say, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him. He didn't say the feet of them. That's what Paul said. Paul was talking about his preachers. Christ is talking about himself. They're going to say, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of him that brings these good tidings. The only reason his preachers' feet are beautiful is because his feet are beautiful. He's the one that brings the glad tidings. He's the one that makes you know he's reigning. Now, do you want strength in the trial? I know some brethren right now suffering, and this is our thought when we start suffering. I just can't read the scripture. I just can't go hear the word preached. You want strength? Do you want comfort? Assemble with the Lord's people under the preaching of this gospel. He said, this is where I'm going to make you know this. This is where I'm going to give you this peace. This is where I'm going to give you this comfort, right here. Right here. Assemble with his people. There's no peace except Christ from above give it, and he's going to give it through his gospel. Now, thirdly, let me wrap this up. What's this light he's going to make us walk in? What's this peace we're going to walk in? First of all, it's knowing this, that Christ is our King who alone is going to break in pieces the oppressor. Verse 4, he said, he shall break in pieces the oppressor. The oppressor is your flesh and mind, brethren. The devil, we know we can't break him in pieces, but Christ can do that. But I'll tell you, the oppressor we think we can break in pieces is our flesh, mine and yours. We can't. We can't. He tells you the only way you can mortify your flesh is through the Spirit. That means you're going to have to flee to him. You're going to have to go to Christ. He's the only one that can make you do it. And he's the only one that make your brethren do it. And he does it through this gospel. So what do we do? What if he's using me to be an aid to my brother and I'm going to walk in the light, how am I going to be a help and be used of Christ as the bride and be a help meet to my husband? How am I going to do that and be a help to him. I'm going to point my brother to Christ and declare to them the truth of the gospel, because he's the only one that can help them. Now, brethren, when your flesh just won't let you find any comfort, when you can't find any comfort because of your sinful flesh, and your trial comes, and you just, and I'll tell you that when a trial hits us, there's times you just don't want to be comforted. You just don't. I don't want to find any comfort, and in our flesh we're not going to. But I'll tell you this: if you truly want spiritual comfort, where real comfort is, brethren, he's going to make you know his grace is sufficient. He will. I'm telling you something. I'm telling you this is so. He will. He will. And He's going to give you this trial to make you experience it and make you know it. And he will. Now look, the result is he's going to make us walk in his peace by faith. Verse 5. This is walking in the light. He shall fear thee as long as the sun and moon endure throughout all generations. When he does this, in every trial, when he renews your heart, he makes you see he's your peace, and he's ruling for you, and he's doing everything he's doing in righteousness for you to show you he's your righteousness, that he's your comforter, that he's your salvation, that he's your strength. When he does that, there's a new reverence for him in your heart. And he's going to do this as long as the sun and the moon endures. He's never going to let his people fall away from him. He's going to keep this reverence in your heart. And the fruit and the peace that he's going to make through this gospel, verse 6, it's all through his God. He shall come down like rain. Verse 6, he shall come down like rain on the mown grass, like showers that water the earth. In his days the righteous shall flourish in abundance of peace, so long as the moon endures. Remember, he told Moses, my doctrine is going to distill as the rain and as the showers on the cut grass. When he sends this gospel, he comes down. He comes down. The Spirit and the gospel is compared to rain, and he distills. He comes down in it. You know this. When you hear it, you know it. You know he spoke to you. You know it. And he comes down, and the first thing he does, he cuts down your flesh, because it's just grass. He said there, he's going to come down like rain on the mown grass. That means to cut grass. He got to cut the grass first, and he's going to cut your flesh down, because our flesh is just grass. But that's good. That's where the pain comes in for us. And that's sad, it does, but it does. That's where the pain comes, because it goes against what we want. But sometimes it's best to go against what we want, most of the time, if not all the time. But that's what but then he's going to give you this, he's going to make the righteous flourish. He's going to make the new man who's righteous, that he's made right, he's going to make you flourish. And that's what he's going to do. And the dominion of this king's all over the world. He'll have dominion, verse 8, from sea to sea, from river to the end of the earth. And it's going to make the wicked, it's going to make people, wherever his people are, they're going to bow to him. And the wicked are going to lick the dust. It's what he's going to do. Now look, here's what I want you to remember. This is it. It's my final word, so here it is. Christ is doing all this not by giving us ease in this world. He's not going to do that. You ain't going to have a perfect government. It's going to get more corrupt and more corrupt and more corrupt till God throws it all in hell. That's just going to happen. Just live with it, because it's going to happen. And your sinful flesh ain't going to get better and better either. It's going to get more corrupt and more corrupt and more corrupt till God throws it in the dirt and makes a new one. He's not going to give us perfect freedom from oppressors in this earth. He's not going to spare us the sorrow of trials on this earth. He's going to use our sin. He's going to use our inability, our falls. He's going to use the power of all the ungodly oppressors. He's going to teach us to look to Christ, our King, alone. To teach us Christ alone is judging in righteousness for us. To teach us Christ alone saves his needy people. To teach us Christ alone are the riches that overcomes our poverty. To teach us that he alone has power to break the oppressor in us and in our brethren. Our peace and our righteousness is Christ. And he's going to make us adorn the gospel. Now let me tell you something about adorning the gospel. You don't add nothing to the gospel. We think of adorning like a woman that's pretty and she puts on pretty earrings and you know, that adorns her. But it really don't add anything to her. She's already pretty. And we don't add anything to the gospel. We adorn the gospel with whatever the gospel's adorned us with, what he adorned us with. Now remember that, brethren, he's going to make you walk in the light of his holiness. But remember, you can only do that with the measure in which he gives you. And so when a brother falls, walking in the light's also being merciful and gracious and forgiving. And if we're not gracious and forgiving, be thankful that he works that in our brethren, because they'll be merciful and gracious and forgiving to us when we're not being merciful and gracious and forgiving. And we want that. Think about it this way. Brethren that have been in this faith for a long time, who are your elder brethren, or aged in years. I learned this from a brother recently I talked to who's well up in years. And the way he spoke to me just was a lesson to me, and just how gracious and kind he was to me. And you know, when these elder brethren are looking at us, they have to see the way we react to things and realize we're just like the way you look at little children. They're just immature. There's sin in them, there's self-righteous in them. But what do they do to you? Treat you like a brother, gracious and kind and forgiving, and point you to Christ. And they see it. They see the things that me and you don't see, because we're you know, you didn't know you was a teenager when you was a teenager. When you got older, you start looking back and you realize my mom and dad was a lot smarter than I thought they was. And that's what happens. As you grow older, you look back and you say, man, I was so full of sin and self-righteousness. And just think how that older brother treated me, gracious and kind and merciful to me. That's what I'm saying. He's teaching us that. That's what he's teaching us. And the mountains are going to bring peace to the people. The little hills are going to come. It's going to come righteousness. Verse 4, he's going to judge you, the poor of the people. He's going to save you, who are the children of the needy. He's going to break in pieces the oppressor. He's going to make you fear, verse 5, as long as the sun and moon endure. And he's going to do it by coming down, verse 6, like the rain on the mown grass through this gospel. He's going to make you flourish. And he's going to do this from sea to sea, because he has the dominion. And those that dwell in the wilderness, wherever his people are, they're going to bow before him and praise him. And all the enemies, our flesh and every other enemy, he's going to bring down to the dust. And you can just bank on that. So it's good. Whatever's happening, it's good. It's right. And we're going to be the better for it always. Amen.